Hi, Trude. I'm very, very happy and very thankful that you have the time for me and us to talk about your three books that I love so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited because, as I said before, it's not for me, it's not just a story that I liked and enjoyed reading. It's also that it's a very important story. Because for everybody who has no idea, it's about stories from the past, how they also influence or can influence our lives today. And because I think that is not really common or not all people are aware how they can influence it. I like that it's in a story and that I can understand through reading through the story. So let's maybe start with you first before we go into the story. You are from Norway, right? And you were a journalist. So how did you work, or how did you end up being an author about fiction?
Well, that started a long time ago. It started actually with my first novel back in, oh, 2002. Uh,
Mhm.
and I only had, there was, I grew up with the stories about my great grandmother, who was living on an island on the coast of Norway. And of course, it's very dominated by men and fisheries and things. And I hadn't heard much about the women. So when I was told the stories about this strong woman who actually was a kind of a boss above all the men, I took interest in it as a journalist and I tried to find out as much as possible about her. But that was very little. But I learned a lot about the time she was living in on the 18th century. So I got this idea that I could write a book inspired by her story, but not her story, and then it became fiction. And today I see, with me focusing so much on women's stories, that there is like a red thread going back to that first book. But I was only going to write that for that book, that novel, and thought that was it. But
Mhm.
then, and I was busy. I had three children. I gave birth to twins at the same time
Oh,
as I had. I was writing the first novel, and I had a TV career, so I didn't write for many years. So I kind of had a new debut as a writer some years later. Hmm.
yeah. And so it's interesting what, so that thought just came up. If somebody has a story and a wish to write it, sometimes time is not right yet, or sometimes life comes in between, but
Mm,
don't give up, right? Just keep
mm,
that story to you till it's ready to give birth to,
mm.
right?
Yes, I think so. And with the historic novels that we are talking about now, the Großmutter-Reihe, so to
Yes.
speak, um, uh, it took years to write it because of all the research. Because what I set out to do was to find the untold stories, the stories that we haven't spoken of. And of course, war history is told by men and it's all about men and fighting. But I think the women's stories are as dramatic, but on a different level, I would say. So I've been carrying with me stories, true stories, and events that I have heard about for many, many years throughout all writing all these three novels. And then you come to a point where you just put all the research away and you kind of go into the feelings of the persons that you have read about and you transform them into fiction.
Hmm.
I used to say that I'd throw everything I know up into the air and I sit down on my computer and I just bring down whatever I need for my story. So, in many ways, yes, they are fiction, but much of what I write about has actually happened during the war, after the war, and to real people.
Mm. So the research part, I mean, that is probably not so difficult for you because of your former career, which is not like it's you probably lived both careers in one then.
I'm
Um,
used to digging.
yeah, yes. I would like to talk about one digging part in particular about Demin, but maybe we can just bring all the listeners in it first. Can you maybe tell us what are the three books about? What's like, who has never heard about it? What's the story about the grandmother, the grandfather, and the grandchild, Julie?
Well, the short answer to that question is that it's about surviving when life becomes almost unbearable. And it's about healing. I think surviving and healing are the two main key words to describe what all three books are about. But of course, in different settings. But how do you handle life when it becomes difficult to live? And then if you survive, how do you heal afterwards? I would say that is the umbrella for all the three books, so to speak. But the first book is about a Norwegian woman who marries a German soldier in 1945 and goes with him to Germany. And it's about what she comes to. What is Germany like in the post-war period, and how is she going to survive this dramatic choice that she has made. And it describes coming to a town where a lot of people have killed themselves on the last few days of the war. And then there are dramatic stuff, things happening to her, and it also describes life in Berlin after the war. And I didn't know anything about Berlin in 1947, for instance. So I had to do a lot of digging into it, and I didn't know how difficult life was in Germany. And so I see that without me deliberately setting out to do it, the first book also it describes the suffering of German people, and we haven't really talked about that. And you have this word Kollektivschuld. And so I didn't come with an agenda to raise this topic, but I think much of the book is about German civilians' sufferings, not only during the war, but also the years after.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is the first book, and in this book, my main character, the Großmutter,
Hmm.
her name is Tekla. At
Hmm.
some point of time, she returns to Norway after the war. I won't spoil anything, but she
Yeah.
returns to Norway and she marries a Norwegian man, Konrad. And they have children and grandchildren, and she never tells any one of them that she was married to a German soldier and that she went to Germany. So that is much of what the first book is about. But after I had published it and it became such a great success, and it still is, 11 years after it was published in Norway, I was thinking of this Norwegian man, Konrad, because I really, really liked him. And I started talking to him and I said, Konrad, you haven't told us anything about what happened to you during the war. Where were you? What did you do? And then I had heard about the war in Southeast Asia and that there were Norwegian citizens who were imprisoned by the Japanese in horrific camps.
Mhm.
And I thought maybe 50 or 100 or something, but there were nearly 1,000. And I also found what the historians hadn't focused on was that more than a third of them were children and women. So I didn't really want to write a book about a man because there's so many books about men, but I could really write a book about Conrad because I found the women's untold stories too. So in book number 2, it's about Conrad's life before he becomes the Großvater, because before he meets Tekla. But in both books, they meet each other from a different perspective.
Mhm.
So the first book is about the Großmutter, and the second one about the Großvater and his life and love life, and the love of his life before he got married to Tekla. So, and that became a success too. And then in the first book, Tekla had, yes, Tekla had a friend called Birgit. And she is an old lady in the first book. And I started thinking, what did Birgit do during the war and after the war? Was she married? What happened to her? And so on. And I started while I was thinking of this, a woman contacted me and she said, I have a story to tell you. And I had heard about foreign prisoners in Norway who were working basically as slaves. Many of them were from the Soviet Union, but from many other countries in Europe too. And there were over 100,000 of them. I didn't know that. And this woman said to me, my mother was one of them. And she stayed in Norway after the war and got married here. And I started asking people, have you heard that there were women among these, what we call the Russian prisoners?
Mhm.
And no one had heard about the women. So it took me years to trying to locate them. Where were the women? And I found Ukrainian women working at a fish factory up above the Arctic Circle
Mhm.
and in a town called Bodø. And they lived in a camp, they worked at the factory every day, and they had a lot of children born there. So I decided the third book must start in Bodø, and Birgit, Tekla's friend,
Mhm.
she is a nurse in Bodø. So a Ukrainian woman and Birgit, they get to know each other and they become Tekla's friends after the war.
Yeah, that what I really loved about also the third part is that it brought us somewhere completely else,
Mhm.
but it was connected, and that I really enjoyed. Like, okay, that's her story. What is how did this like infiltrate like the experience in her life when they all come back together on the island? Nobody talked about it. So what I really loved is that all the stories, it doesn't matter which one, because there are many stories, even if it's not the main character, could be our grandmother, could be our grandfather. So it could be that or the grandfather, that the that there are so many stories nobody talked about. It could be a story that I'm maybe suffering, or that it's infiltrating my life without
Mm.
knowing about the story. And that is
Right.
something that is
Yeah. And I've been
fascinating.
traveling in
Mhm.
Germany. I've been on reading tours 3 times actually, traveling all over Germany and meeting readers. And so many come to me and say, I read the first book about the Großmutter, and they got inspired to try to find out what happened to the women in their families during
Mhm.
the war.
Mhm.
And they came up with stories that had never been spoken of, had never been told by anyone. And the same happened with the Großvater book, that what happened to, what did the man in my
Mhm.
family do? So people, in Germany have shared their family stories. I think I've started a lot of discussions around the dinner tables in Germany by writing these books, and it's absolutely the same in Norway.
Yeah.
The reactions are very similar, but of course, in some way, the readers emphasize different sides of the stories. But
Mhm.
it's all about the impact that the novels have made on people, on the readers, and got them to dig into their own family stories. And the other element is that very often people come to me in Germany and in Norway, and the first sentence is, I didn't know that.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
had never heard about the mass suicide in Demmin or whatever. So people understand that it's fiction, but it's true at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think then, as long as it's not only fiction, it's not only something that has been going on in my head, but it has a greater impact on the reader because it's about real people too.
Yes, yes, definitely. That's why I love it so much. For me, your books are kind of three therapists who tell you a story and it maybe resonates with you, or you get, as you just said, interested in searching the own stories of the family, and also understanding that it doesn't matter if you were a man, a woman, a child, it doesn't matter which culture. There are all stories which
Mm,
haven't been told and were very deep and hurtful as well. So
mm.
it's what I like is that maybe thoughts we had before about boxes, they you unfold boxes and there's a lot more in
Right.
the box than we thought.
Mm. Oh, yes.
Could you share a bit about your journey to them and the encounters you had there and how these moments shaped also emotional layers of your book?
Yeah, well, that journey started like it must be 15 years ago. And I read a book about a Norwegian lady who was in Germany in 1945 before the end of the war. And the Russians came from the east on their way to Berlin. And she was living on a farm. She had married a German man, and she was living with his parents and grandparents, and it was a big farm. And when the Russians came, they raped all the women, but they didn't rape her because she had a Norwegian flag on her blouse, and they understood that she was Norwegian. So, I think this is so heavy because during the war, the Russians were our friends
Hmm.
and the Germans were our enemies. Today it's all the way around. Today we are friends with the Germans and we have very difficult relationship with Russia. But the Russians didn't rape her because she was Norwegian. So it was only the German women. So I started looking into rape as a weapon during the Second World War. And I was so shocked when I saw the numbers of how many German women were raped by the Russians, how many died from rape and so on. And this is, to me, this was, I was amazed that it wasn't in the history books.
Mm.
And I found a small clip on YouTube by a woman who told the story of her grandmother or her mother, I think it was, who was raped many times the same day by the Russians, and how she and other women uh, committed suicide. And it didn't say anything about where this was, but I managed to find out that it had to be in this town, Demmin, and there wasn't much online on them. In. So I had to go there and talk to people. And I remember I talked to people at the church, and there was a small museum, and I was blown away by the story about how the women were raped. The Russians were trapped in the city because the bridges out of town were bombed. So the Russians started burning down the city and raping the women. And then, of course, before the Russians came, the people were told how barbaric the Russians were, and that it actually was better to kill yourself than um, to meet the Russians. So that's exactly what people did. They started killing themselves. And I thought, why isn't this in the history books? Why hasn't the big historians about who's written about the war and European history, why haven't they written about them in? And of course, at the same time as I published the first book where I placed my Norwegian lady in Demmin. She comes to Demmin a few months after the mass suicide. And now there's much more online, and there's been made a film, and it has, Demmin has been mentioned in many books. But when I started digging into it, it
Mhm.
was very difficult to find any documentation. And I walked on the streets in Demmin, and I met some teenagers, and I asked them, have you heard about the mass grave in Demmin on the churchyard? And they said, yes, yes. And I thought, oh, good, good. And I said, do you know how many are there in this mass grave? And this boy said, I think there's at least 10 or 12, he said. And we don't know how many there are. Are there 700 or are there 1,500 dead people in this mass grave? Nobody knows, actually.
Mhm. Mhm. That was a scene that did something to me. It worked for weeks. For weeks it worked inside me because I thought the same, like why didn't don't we know about such an
Mm.
strong energy field? So if I'm, like, for example, driving through that area on my way to holiday and I
Yeah.
have a topic in my family system, it probably does something to me without even that I know it. So it's yeah, I found that really, really strong. Do you have a number of how many women got raped by the Russians?
No, in I mean, nobody knows. I tried to write down all the names of the people who killed themselves,
Mm-hmm.
because not only the women kill themselves and their children too. And nobody knows how many there were or how many were raped or anything. But they gave up because there came so many dead to the churchyard, and they buried them there,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave up counting.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, actually, but I think the explanation about why we haven't heard anything about it uh, is uh, quite simple. I think Demmin was in Eastern Germany, and it was run by the communists and by Moscow. So the Russians didn't want anyone to talk about what happened in Demmin. So they were not allowed to talk about it. If you grew up in Demmin and you had children, they went to school, they learned in Demmin that the Russian came and liberated the people in Demmin from the Nazis. And you can say, well, the Russians raped your grandmother and she killed herself. So this huge mass grave was overgrown, so you couldn't see that there was a mass grave. Not until the wall came down, there was a memorial erected, and they were open about what happened, because you couldn't tell your children what really happened, because they could go out on the street and
Yeah.
talk about it, and then the Stasi would come on your door. So there was put a lid on
Mm-hmm.
everything that happened
Mm-hmm.
until recent days. So I think that's why it hasn't been talked about, but now it's different though.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, of course. I didn't think about it, but of course, makes
Yeah.
total sense.
Mm.
And I think
I've been
that,
thinking a lot about it because I couldn't believe it.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And I think that's probably for all the stories that are in that area. Of course, it's not just one city. There
Yes,
happened a lot
yes.
more. And you just said that they couldn't talk about it because it was dangerous. That is a huge topic for that area in general. What I find when I work with people from ehemalige DDR, the topic of speaking out your truth is huge.
Mm.
So, yeah,
Till today.
till today, yes.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It's almost like the cells were not allowed to speak, and
Mm.
being not allowed to speak gets from one generation to the next. So, and now you're a young person and you can't really speak. You feel like I have always something in my throat, can't speak my truth, or are angry, or too angry, or too sad, or whatever. So yeah, it's
But maybe that is, I mean, the success I have in Germany came as a surprise to me. But what you're saying now is that, or what other people and my publisher said is that I don't have an agenda.
yeah.
I don't say this is something you should speak about. I just tell a story about a Norwegian woman, and in that story, I also deal with the silence of German people. But it's not my agenda to open up. I didn't know I was doing that.
Hmm.
I was just telling the story the best way I could,
Yeah,
and now mm, it's like I've opened up a taboo in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
At least I don't know, but that's what people tell me.
Yeah, it's almost that there's a voice, like there is the voice of Tekla, there's the voice of Konrad, and if I'm having similar stories in my story, they get a voice. They're saying it's
Right.
something like, but that's my story, or I experienced something similar. I couldn't speak about it. I wasn't allowed to speak about it. I couldn't speak about it. And this is something I think till today, the massive impact on us today about this stories they couldn't speak about because it was not safe, or it was too much, they had to put it away, has an impact. And this is coming up now, I think, and that's why
Mm.
there's no like that's also for me a reason why your books are still so successful here, because it's time. So
Mm.
you were like a pioneer on on the
Well,
topic.
it's interesting to say the great interest young people in Germany have taken to my books. But don't you think there's a new generation now who are more open to speak about everything so many
Of
years
course,
after?
of course, but they want to, but sometimes they have like um how do I say it, in their Porsche, they have a fast car, they have a handbrake, and they don't even know about that handbrake because it's not the handbrake of that person's car,
Mm.
it's from the grandfather or the grandmother. And so the healing part is, or it needs to be healed in order for that handbrake to get down and you have your full PS. So yes, but it makes sense that young people are interested in it because they feel like, something resonates with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I think it's a huge healing book. Really, it's not just a story. I mean, you know that, but uh, it's a healing book for me, definitely. And I've from a lot of people I'm working with, they read it and they are agreeing it's a healing book. So
Oh, that's
a
lovely.
healing journey.
Surviving and healing.
Yes,
But the
exactly.
question is, yeah, I give a lot of talks around Norway and I travel a lot, and my main message is that uh, to heal there must be love.
Hmm.
And in these three books there are different sorts of love. For instance, in a terrible camp in Indonesia, where women and children are together, there is love between the women. They're helping each other. There's love between a mother and her daughter. And in a different camp where all the men are there, there are there's love between brothers, and there you need other people and you need love to survive when life becomes so difficult. And there's love between man and woman, and there are all sorts of love. And it's the only way for these characters that I have created, also in this new book coming out now. There's love, friendship. That
Yeah.
is love too.
Yes.
And in friendship between these women in this last book, uh, the friendship survives despite the fact that these women have made dramatic choices that are very, very different, and they made many mistakes. And so, how do you forgive each other and even strengthen the friendship after the war? That is what this last book is, and I think it's such a beautiful friendship between women saying that you made this choice. I totally disagree with you. I don't understand how you could do that, but I love you.
Yes.
And I made mistakes too. Can you forgive me? Can we forgive each other? Can we still be best friends? Yeah.
And uh, again, it's interesting because this is for me also something that is similar to your first book, where you say, hey, that's already so many years ago. For me, that third book is already set in stone, something that we need for the next couple of years, because we need community. We need other people with all this stuff that's going on around the world. We need connection, and we need connection from the heart. And that's why I totally agree. It's a beautiful friendship. And I loved traveling with each of one through their stories, and that they dance together. It's beautiful. How was it to do all the research with that? Because also um, playing in many different parts
No,
in the
it was
world.
very difficult actually. But when I wrote the first book about Großmutter and about Berlin and the mean, I didn't know anything about Germany from 1945 and onwards, or what was life in Berlin, what happened in the mean. So, and the same happened. I set out to write about something that I didn't know anything about, and that
Hmm.
was the same with this last book because I didn't know anything about what it was like on a fish factory in Bodø above the Arctic Circle in 1943. And I didn't know anything about all these camps that were around Norway where foreigners were living um, terrible lives, as if it hasn't been a part of integrated into the Norwegian stories. The Norwegian war story is about the heroes, you know,
Hmm.
and not about other people in who were
Hmm.
suffering and dying and put into mass graves in Norway, for instance. I was absolutely shocked when I found all these facts.
Hmm.
So it took me many years, and of course I was trying to find the women. So there are quite a lot of literature about men who were prisoners in war prisoners or war laborers in Norway. But the women, they are footnotes. So I had to read many books and many research material in from the universities and so on. And I managed to find the women in between, a little bit of them. And then I could go more specifically to this fish factory or the
Hmm.
hospital in Bodø, where much of the action takes place too. So, of course, when you set out to write about something you don't know anything about, and that in addition is something that hasn't been written about or talked about, then you make it very hard for yourself.
Yes. Yes. What was and what is your fuel to write all that and to dig and keep digging? What do you think is your fuel? Because I mean, I know how hard it is and how much effort it is to write a book, but I have no idea how hard it is to write about something I have no idea about. And I have to do
Yeah.
a lot of research first. So,
Well, I think that it's like 60% of the work with the book is only the research,
hmm.
not the writing. Um, well, my fuel, I think all m- being a journalist for many years, I can see how even my crime novels always starts with uh, me being a journalist, digging into a topic, for instance. And of course, I was for many years a political journalist at the parliament in Norway and working with the covering the government and all these people that you've heard about, like Jens Stoltenberg. You know, I had a debate program, and he was there, and the other prime ministers came, and so on. And when I felt that the politicians didn't want to talk to me, that there was something unspoken, hidden even, that I didn't want journalists to know, then I really wanted to dig into it. And I got this tingling feeling in my spine of being on the track of something unspoken and untold. And I get that same feeling sometimes when I start working with a novel, for instance, about these Freundinnen and what they
Hmm.
were doing during the war and all the things I didn't know anything about, that I'm on the track to something, not just a good story, but an important story to tell
Hmm.
because we haven't spoken about it.
Hmm.
It's untold stories, and that is my fuel. Then I'm unstoppable. I just, even how hard it is and how little I can find and how much I pull myself by the hair, I just can't stop because I feel this needs to be spoken about and to be told.
Well, I'm so touched by your words. I could actually start crying, really. This is so important, and wow, thank you so much for doing that, for
Now
putting
I'm getting
all
moved
your
too. You move me.
I mean, not many people know how hard it is to write a book and not like what you get is what you get from that book or from the people. Maybe they don't have an idea how much fuel that also or fills up the fuel because it has an impact.
Mm,
But you invest so much first, so
mm.
without knowing how it comes up or what comes out. So wow. Ah, I have a new hero in my inspiration
Yeah, well,
road.
well, I think it's about the healing process also is about talking about things. And I think in all these books, mm, the readers have said that they always think about how much better it is if we talk about things,
Hmm.
and instead of keeping it trapped inside, of having that feeling in a family that there is a big secret in this family that we are not supposed to talk about. What does it do to people in that family, to the children growing up there, that there is something unspoken, something almost dangerous to talk about? So, about healing is also about transparency.
Yeah,
Mm,
yes. And it is. I think that's also something because they, of course, how could people like our grandfathers, grandmothers, they had to survive. That was first priority, not being true, or not tell the truth. But the impact is so important, and now this like a lot of people are suffering from burnout or sadness, depression, anger, bad relationships, and this is all like there's so much poison in the boxes they haven't like about the unspoken stuff. So it's time to speak, and it's that I love so much that your books help to speak about it, even if it's not for, even if the people aren't alive anymore. I think that's possible inside us too.
And we must remember that the civilians are always suffering the most on
Hmm.
both sides in a war. I think if we look at Russia and Ukraine now,
Hmm.
of course, it's not difficult to be compassionate about the civilians in Ukraine and how unfair this war is. But at the same time, I think as in Germany, the civilians were suffering during the war, we haven't really thought much about it or so on. And we should also remember that there are women in Russia grieving for their husbands and their sons who've been sent to Ukraine to die. So there are, war is only suffering,
Yeah,
only suffering.
yeah, that's true.
Mm.
That's true. And also there are so many, as we said before, so many stories. Um, yeah, they are or point of views, and the so much in the air that we can't really grab. So yeah, and it's connected to it. It doesn't go away. So
I wrote about Moscow after the war.
mhm,
In this last book, much
yes.
of the action takes place in Moscow. Uh, at the beginning of the Cold War. And I didn't know much about Moscow, and I couldn't go there given the situation in the world today. And Birgit, who is the person who is working at the embassy, she loves everything Russian. She loves the literature, music, and she's so excited that finally she's going to Russia. She speaks Russian fluently, and people are so hostile, and she gets such a shock. And I think there's a parallel situation to the beginning of the Cold War and about indoctrination of a people and telling them what is right and what is not right. And we see one lunatic in America and another one in Russia, and they're not telling the truth, and they're lying, and they are. Um, it's very parallel to the situation after the war, and
Yes.
the history is repeating itself. Uh, but now you see Netanyahu, Trump, Putin, and all the way we the best thing that came out of the Second World War was a new world order. There were rules, how we respect other countries' boundaries, how we actually treat people in a war. How look at how people are treated in the Gaza, and there were rules for all this, and they were obeyed by the big nations. And now all that is as if that it's being challenged. The order of the world that helped us to coexist together as people on one planet, that is now being challenged. And I think that's very, very important. It's as if some of the leaders in the world today haven't followed and haven't learned anything in the history classrooms, and it's so difficult to understand how things repeat themselves
Hmm.
so many years after the war, and how Mm, it was the war started in the 30s. We had nations who were doing exactly the same and became very nationalistic. It's about me and us and them. It's not
Hmm.
about all us
Hmm.
together. And the barriers, the economic politics, it was much the same that led up to the Second World War that we see leaders do today, and it's terrifying.
Exactly. And it's um what For me, when I'm seeing how the stories repeat, it's sometimes very overwhelming. And
Mm.
how do you deal? Probably you feel something, but how do you deal with all the emotions then that come up when you see
I,
the story repeating itself?
I think the healthiest way is to get absolutely furious because then you don't get so afraid. But I get very, very upset about what's happening in Gaza, and it's a genocide, and it's orchestrated by the Israeli with the help of the Americans. And I couldn't imagine anything like this happening only a few years ago. And it's as if some leaders are managing their country as if they were uh, estate developers. You know, it's not politicians,
Hmm.
as we would like to think that politicians should be.
Yeah, true. And how is it? Because when you write about all those past stories, and they are so heavy and intense, um, in all varieties. Even the love is very intense. It's very so it's all very intense. How do you deal with all those emotions, all the information? How do you keep yourself, let's say, grounded or healthy through such a huge process?
Well, it's about being a writer. You can't get all that emotional. You have to write to make readers emotional. If
Hmm.
you're too emotional yourself, you can't write. So you have to kind of take a step back and look at it from the outside. Whether you're writing a book or you're making a film, or I think it was sometimes much more difficult when I was a journalist and I met people who were the victims. They were sitting in front of me, to keep my tears back. But
Hmm.
when I'm writing, I'm like a conductor. I'm conducting a huge orchestra,
Hmm.
and I look at the violin and I point at the one with the drums, and so it's a profession, of course.
Hmm.
Uh, but reading about people who actually um, suffered, that is the hard part, not writing about that.
Hmm. Hmm. I understand. Makes sense. And
Mm.
it's a good, what you just said is a good intention to say, okay, I'm writing something so it makes others emotional. And that's worked perfectly with all these three books I've read.
Thank you.
So to the end, I ask my or I ask myself sometimes, but also others, the question, um, if the heart has the last word, what would your heart just say right now as a last word for this wonderful hour we just spent together?
My heart,
Yes.
yes. Well, uh, I am more than anything grateful. People in Norway come to me and say, "Oh, you're so good. Look at your success in Germany and other countries and so on. You're so good." And I said, I'm well, I've written these books, so I must be good at something. But most of all, in my heart, I'm very grateful for the people I have met and meet, like you, that take interest in my books. And I have a wonderful publisher and at the Fischer Verlage, and a wonderful editor, and they work together with the sales and marketing people, and they have taken these books after I wrote them and made them successful. And that makes me so grateful, and that I'm going on a new tour in Germany in October. I'm meeting readers all through the country. I'm meeting journalists. I meet people who make podcasts, and it's an adventure.
Yeah,
And I'm so grateful.
I'm also very grateful that you gave me your time, which is very because you're writing right now, so it's an even bigger present for me and for us. So thank you very much. Thank you for writing those amazing stories. I hope this time inspired a lot of people to keep reading them. And I hope we may see each other in the exhibit in Frankfurt. We will see. And thank you so much for being here.
Hope to see you in Frankfurt, and thank you for talking to me. That was absolutely lovely.
Thank you.